You may be seated. Wonderful to see you all this morning. Thank you so much for coming. Gosh, on Father's Day, you get to say, I'm just going to sleep in. And here you are. Thank you so much for coming and making our community so much more because you are here. You know, I want to start out with a story about a friend of mine. You know, in college, I was in a fraternity, and I had a fraternity brother, and his name was Dwayne Six. Dwayne Six. He was an upperclassman. I was a freshman. And he was constantly chewing tobacco. And he had a last name that was a number, Dwayne Six. How cool was that? Well, as we know, in college, we have a time of searching for ourselves when we go out for those 4 years. We look for mentors. We try on new things. We try on new hats. We're in search of our true identities, which is often done on a trial and error basis. This is what was going on when I came home for Christmas break with a bag of beech nut chewing tobacco. I'm very thankful to my parents who let me chew in the house, for my girlfriend's parents for not raising a ruckus, and for giving me the space to figure out eventually on my own that chewing tobacco was not really for me. I think they were also thankful that they were not around at that decisive moment for me when I got up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom and I kicked over the very full spittoon. It was in my dorm room and it was not in either of their houses. Then after my sophomore year, after chewing tobacco and giving that up, I decided I would be the hat man. And that I would bring my growing collection of hats to college, where I hung them around the perimeter of my dorm room, never leaving the dorm wearing the same hat more than once. Never mind that I never really looked particularly good in hats, but it was something distinctive and colorful and eventually also discarded as I went through that phase looking for my authentic self. I narrowed in on my search. You know, we do that as we get older. I went to seminary. I was ordained. I began working in church, first as an associate, then here as your rector, and as your preacher, week after week, bringing you a message from the scriptures. And like you, I am aware that there are many ways to preach a sermon. I have seen people who get very loud when they preach. I have seen people who get very excited when they preach. I have seen people bring forth the word of God with great drama and with great emotion. But that's not really me. I'm much quieter, I'm more reserved, I'm more unpredictable. I strive to be myself. I have learned that being me is the most powerful person I can be. I have learned that living into my own distinctive gifts is my sweet spot. I have learned that when I shun imitation and I pursue my own uniqueness, because like you, I have a voice of the Spirit inside of me. Doesn't always tell me the green lights, but it does show me the red lights. And I'm able to kind of figure out who I am and live into myself more fully. And when I do this, things just go better. Maybe you found that out in your life, that it's just easiest to be you, to quit performing, to stop trying to impress, to relax and just be yourself. And soon we discover that this is where we're closest to God. It was an ancient church father named Irenaeus who said the glory of God is the human being fully alive. The glory of God is for you to be you. And this is the theme of today's sermon. It's pretty basic, I know, but it's Father's Day and we dads sometimes need things spelled out. Be yourself. Be who you are. Discover that as ordinary as you may think of yourself, there is nothing ordinary about you. There is nothing ordinary about you. In a world begging for imitation, fashion, music, lifestyle, life choices, make your decision based on who you are. Make choices grounded in your own personal convictions, not your peer group, not what people expect of you, but in yourself. Run your own race, not somebody else's. That still small voice inside of you that God put there is there for good reason. It's there for you to be you, because we all need you to be you in order for the world to be what God wants it to be. Al, I wonder, what would a symphony be like if everybody played the violin? Or if everybody played the oboe? I'm sure it would sound great, but it wouldn't sound nearly as inspiring as it would with everyone playing to the best of their ability their own unique God-given instrument. God has given you and only you your own distinctive instrument. Don't take somebody else's. Play your own instrument to the best of your ability. Don't be afraid. Be yourself. There's nothing ordinary about you. You know, this idea comes to mind as we witness Jesus calling the 12 disciples that Father Steve read for us. Father Steve, thanks for dressing up so much today. It's about time to give him a break, isn't it? Those 12 disciples, they went out and Jesus told them to take authority over unclean spirits, to cast them out, to cure every disease, to cure every sickness. Jesus has given these 12 followers a job that I've always thought was normative. Aren't I to go out and do the exact same thing? Aren't I to go out and cure the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the lepers, cast out demons, leaving behind a change of clothes, my credit cards, even a bad lunch? To do exactly what they did was their job. Isn't it mine too? Well, like a lot of stories of the disciples, my first inclination is to think that Jesus is calling me to do the exact same thing. But I figured out that he has, and he hasn't. Now, of course, there are themes of liberation and of healing and restoration and reconciliation at play here. Things that Christians of all ages and all places are to be about. The stories we hear of these disciples have certain normative themes to them. But our job isn't to be who Jesus called them to be. Our job is to be who Jesus has called us to be. Be yourself, created, redeemed, and called to be a Jesus person. But to be the unique, God-ordained, God-anointed Jesus person that only you can be. You were born at a time, in a certain family, around certain friends, in a certain community, speaking a certain language, eating certain foods that only you will ever do. And God invites us to be ourselves, for there is nothing ordinary about you. You know, many of you have passed through the parking lot, and especially this morning, and seen that wonderful 1964 Mercedes-Benz 230 SL parked in the pastor's parking spot. Well, I bought that car back in the 1900s, back in 1997, when I was working at a TV station in Los Angeles. And as a single person, I had the blessed opportunity to purchase a car I wanted to drive for the rest of my life. I looked at many models, I considered many possibilities before deciding on that particular car, which was owned by two lawyers in Long Beach, and I was sure I had overpaid when I handed them that check for $12,000. Well, as I pursued my call to ministry, I was studying in seminary, worked soon after as a hospital chaplain. Then I was an intern in a particularly poor parish. Well, this decision about this car started to get to me. Driving such a fancy car and being a minister, well, isn't that part of the call to serve God, that you have to drive a Pinto or a Chevette or an Aspire for the rest of your life? And so I had that Mercedes packed up and I sent it to Chicago and have my best friend watch over it while I figured this out. And then I bought a 10-year-old black 4-door Buick. Now there's a minister's car. Do they make Buicks anymore? I don't know. Yeah, they do. I'm sorry?
Not sedan.
Not sedans. Well, this was roomy. It was quite a sedan. It was dependable. It was the epitome of a nondescript car, and I never once worried about somebody stealing it. But it really wasn't that much less expensive. I mean, it used more gas. It was harder to park. I never really looked forward to driving it. And I never quite felt like it was me. I guess being from Detroit and having auto workers in my family for generations, I had always loved driving a convertible through the countryside especially, and feeling, if I may be so bold, God's presence in the wind and the warmth of the open road. And while I've never been able to fully explain it, driving in that convertible had always helped me feel more like me, more connected to nature, to God. And that's the reason I called my friend up. I called him a few years later. He wasn't happy to take the call when I asked for the car back. And I've been driving it ever since. What are the experiences you have that make you feel more authentic and connected to God? Because that's what it's about, folks, is for us to be more connected to God. Because remember, God is love, the source of love. And the more connected we are to God, the more that love flows through us. How are you trying to fit into somebody else's idea of who you should be and not your own? Because your own idea will coincide with God's idea of who we should be. How good are you at being yourself? When I was in high school, my cross-country team qualified for the state meets. Back then it was a 3-mile race. I guess it's probably close to that now. And we trained all year to do our best. As a runner, I'd always found that I did my best when I kind of went out with the middle of the pack. And then at the end, when other people were running out of gas, I always found a way to just kind of suck it up and sprint at the end and summon up all my strength and pass a lot of people towards the finish line. Well, here we are at the state meets with teams from all over Michigan, along with runners who I'd heard about, I never met. There was no internet. You just see their names in the paper and their times. And here we are lined up, hundreds of us, for that big state meet, awaiting that starting gun. And I was just overtaken with the competition, the anxiety, the excitement, the pageantry. And as that gun went off, with the speed of those leading runners. And instead of finding my pace and running my race, I decided to go out with the leaders and run their race. And I sprinted to the very front of the pack, where at least at this initial point in the race, I was the fastest runner in the state of Michigan, until I wasn't. After that first mile, I hit the proverbial wall. My lungs were hurting, my legs ached, I began to fade faster than the smoke from that starter's gun. And by the end of that race, I had not run my best race. I had run one of my worst races. I had not run my race, but somebody else's. And I have since discovered that, like cross country, life is not a competition with others, not with friends, with coworkers, with siblings, with neighbors. Life is a competition with ourselves, to be the best that we can be, to run our own race. Of course, I can't run like Usain Bolt. I can't preach like Bishop Bonnie. I can't sing like Jim Kenny. But I can encourage a few people. I can inspire a few people. And I can smile. And I'm good at that. The point is, don't get distracted trying to keep up with someone with whom you're never supposed to keep up. Sure, they may have something I don't, but that's okay. I'm not running their race. I'm running mine. You're running yours. And it has a destiny all its own. So what do I do when somebody passes me? Don't I want to be in the lead, in first place? Well, I've learned that the best posture that we can realize is understanding that we're not in competition with them. We're in competition with ourselves to figure out who we are and what our own unique race is about. So when other people pass you, bless them. Wish them well. Don't be intimidated. Don't feel less of a person. Be happy for someone who passes you. It means that God has blessed them. And you know what? That same God will bless you. We all have a tendency to be jealous, to find fault with those who outdo us. We want to talk badly about them. We want to disparage their achievements. But we know that that's the wrong attitude. It's a trap. Be happy for them. Rejoice in the good fortune of others. Some of us like country music, and there was a famous song once written called "I Thank God for Unanswered Prayer." Because you may be aspiring for something that isn't good for you. Run your own race. Be your own person. Rejoice in the good fortune of others. Thank God those 12 disciples that Jesus sent out were able to perform miracles. God has different miracles for you and for me. And this is so important because God is working inside of each one of us to create a symphony of healing, a symphony of reconciliation, a symphony of redemption that only comes about when you and I are authentically ourselves. But what if our gift, our lives, are insignificant? Well, that's what a little girl named Sadako Sasaki once thought. She was injured by a nuclear bomb back in Hiroshima, Japan in 1945. She was 2 years old. She was hospitalized numerous times, which is when she learned about the legend of 1,000 cranes, which is a Japanese tale that promises a wish granted to anybody who folds 1,000 origami paper cranes. Well, unable to do very much in the hospital, Sasako figured she could fold paper cranes, which she did, and she immediately enjoyed. Even as her condition worsened, Sadako continued folding those paper cranes. By the time she died, she folded 1,300 of them. Well, others heard about her perseverance, and they were touched. So much so that tens of thousands of paper cranes have been folded by children her age and older, and these days donated to the Hiroshima Peace Memorial in Japan, all inspired by little Sadako and the small act of folding paper cranes. Many of us here today are going through adversity, and we have no idea how many people are watching us, are witnessing to the grace, to the ways we're going through these things without complaining, without being bitter, without being angry. And that can be a miracle in itself. None of us here know how many people we are inspiring in our pursuit of us being ourselves. The point is that none of us should discount our gift. It may feel small compared to others. It may feel small to ourselves. But there's nothing ordinary about you. You have the fingerprints of God all over you. Each one of us are made in God's image. Each one of us has the spark of God inside of us and the unique, irreplaceable gift and purpose of God coursing through our veins. If we were to sum up the gospel into one word, it would be hope. Because this is what the gospel gives us. We don't have to have a great gift for God to use us in a great way. And this is for God to decide, not us. We are called to do God's work, which by definition is great work. This was not easy for Sarah to understand. Thank you, Walter, for reading that lesson for us. I heard some of us chuckling as we went through that lesson. We heard about 90-year-old Sarah and her even older husband Abraham, that she would bring forth Isaac, giving birth to Israel, to God's redemptive plan for the world. Israel, of course, is birthed in, of course, Abraham, but Abraham wasn't circumcised. It was Isaac who was the very first one circumcised. But of course, Sarah thought this was ridiculous, and so she laughed. How could nations and kings of nations be inside of me, Sarah thought, at 90 years old. So she thought it was so preposterous that you remember the story a few years earlier, she'd heard that promise and she tried to move it along by having her husband sleep with the maid and have children that way. But God said, no, Sarah. That's not what I had in mind. I have nations and kings of nations inside of you that need to come forth. And I am not going to bring forth my promise through somebody else, but through you. Friends, we are all pregnant with God's promise as well. We are pregnant with possibility. We are pregnant with destiny. We are pregnant with God's promises of security and provision and purpose. And it takes us being us, not doing things that are inauthentic like Sarah tried to do, but by patiently waiting for God to do what God promised. Having faith that we are where we're supposed to be, not trying to imitate how other runners are running the race, but knowing that God has put in us unique gifts and powers and insights for us to play our own irreplaceable roles in the redemption of the world. So, friends, as we go forth this day, on this Father's Day, let us give God the glory for making each of us the uniquely gifted people we are, for reminding us that we were created and set aside for priceless and incomparable work that no one else will ever be able to duplicate. Amen.